Picture this. You're in a high-stakes meeting. Tensions are rising, voices are getting louder, the air is thick with frustration. Then, all eyes turn to you. At this moment, you have a choice. Become part of the chaos, or become the steady presence that calms the storm. Great leaders aren't the ones who avoid conflict. They're the ones who navigate it with confidence and clarity. But how? How do the best leaders handle pressure, disagreement, and confrontation without losing their cool? Conflict is inevitable. Whether in business, relationships, or everyday life, there will always be moments when tensions rise, when disagreements surface, and when emotions run high. But what separates great leaders from the rest is not the absence of conflict. It's their ability to handle it with intention, not impulse. Most people react. It's human nature. Someone says something that feels like an attack, and before they even have time to process it, they fire back. An email comes through that feels aggressive, and within seconds, fingers are furiously typing a response, hitting send before a second thought crosses their mind. We've all been there. But leaders, true leaders, don't operate that way. They understand that between every stimulus and response, there is a critical moment of choice. That moment may be brief, but it's the difference between fueling the fire and extinguishing it, between escalating a problem and finding a solution, between losing trust and earning respect. The key is self-awareness. When a leader is self-aware, they recognize their own triggers. They know which words, tones, or situations have the potential to set them off. And instead of letting those triggers control them, they take a step back. They pause. They allow themselves the space to assess the situation, to process not just what is being said, but why it is being said. Pausing doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean indecision. It means discipline. It means choosing the long-term impact over the short-term satisfaction of reacting in the heat of the moment. Think about the last time you witnessed a great leader in a high-pressure situation. Maybe it was in a boardroom, maybe it was in a crisis, maybe it was during a difficult conversation. Did they raise their voice? Did they let frustration dictate their words? Or did they maintain composure, listen attentively? That's the power of choosing response over reaction. It's about maintaining control, not over the situation, but over yourself. Because in moments of conflict, people don't remember the argument itself as much as they remember how it made them feel. They remember whether they felt heard, valued, and respected, or dismissed, belittled, and attacked. And that memory shapes how they will respond to you in the future. Great leaders know this. They don't just think about the moment, they think about the relationship, they think about the team, the culture, the trust that is either being built or broken with every interaction. So instead of reacting on impulse, they ask themselves, what is really being said here? Is this about me, or is it about something deeper? What outcome do I want from this conversation? How can I respond in a way that de-escalates instead of ignites? It's a shift from defense to understanding, from proving a point to finding a path forward. And in that shift, real leadership begins. Conflict at its core is not just about disagreement, it's about perception. It's about how safe people feel expressing their thoughts, how much they believe their voice matters, and whether they trust the intentions of the person on the other side of the table. When trust is absent, conflict becomes a battle. Every disagreement feels personal. Every word is scrutinized. People enter conversations with their defenses up, ready to fight rather than find a solution. The focus shifts from resolving the issue to protecting themselves, their ego, or their position. And when that happens, progress stalls. But when trust is present, everything changes. Disagreements don't feel like attacks. They feel like opportunities to learn. People assume positive intent rather than looking for hidden agendas. They listen to understand, not just to respond. Conflict becomes less about proving who's right and more about discovering what's right. Trust is the invisible thread that holds teams together, and leaders set the tone. The way a leader handles conflict determines whether that thread strengthens or snaps under pressure. Do they foster an environment where people feel safe voicing their concerns? Do they encourage open dialogue without fear of punishment or retaliation? Do they listen with the intent to understand, or do they dismiss perspectives that challenge their own? A leader's reaction to conflict teaches people how safe it is to engage in difficult conversations. If a leader meets disagreement with hostility, silence becomes the norm. People stop speaking up. They nod in meetings, but hold their real thoughts back. They avoid confrontation, not because the issues have disappeared, but because they've learned that honesty comes with a cost. And when that happens, trust erodes. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, over time. A small moment here, a dismissive comment there, a leader who interrupts instead of listens, a team member who speaks up once and is shut down. One by one, these moments add up, until people no longer believe that conflict can be productive. But when a leader prioritizes trust, conflict becomes a tool for growth. It's no longer something to avoid, it's something to navigate together. People feel safe enough to challenge ideas because they know they won't be punished for it. They trust that their leader values truth over comfort, solutions over silencing dissent. Trust doesn't mean that conflict disappears. It doesn't mean that disagreements aren't passionate or difficult. It simply means that people believe they can engage in those conversations without fear of betrayal, dismissal, or retaliation. And that belief changes everything. Leaders who build trust understand that it's not about perfection. It's about consistency. It's about showing up time and time again with integrity. It's about proving through action, not just words, that every voice matters. It's about demonstrating that conflict isn't a threat. It's an opportunity to strengthen relationships, deepen understanding, and move forward together. In moments of conflict, perspective is everything. It shapes how we interpret words, how we assign meaning to actions, and ultimately how we respond. But here's the challenge. Our default perspective is always our own. We see the world through the lens of our experiences, our emotions, our beliefs. And when conflict arises, we instinctively assume that our version of reality is the correct one. That's where great leaders stand apart. They don't just see the situation from where they're standing. They step back, shift angles, and consider multiple viewpoints before making a decision. They understand that every conflict has layers, and those layers reveal themselves only when we're willing to look beyond our immediate perspective. Imagine two people standing on opposite sides of a number painted on the ground. One sees a 6, the other sees a 9. They both argue, convinced they are right. And in a way, they both are. But until one of them is willing to walk to the other side and see what the other sees, the argument remains at a standstill. Leaders do this naturally. They don't just ask, what do I think about the situation? They ask, how might the other person be seeing this? They recognize that their initial interpretation might not be the full picture, and they actively seek to expand their understanding. This shift in perspective is what separates leaders who resolve conflicts from those who escalate them. Instead of assuming bad intent, they consider context. Instead of jumping to conclusions, they ask questions. Instead of holding tightly to their position, they stay open to the possibility that they might be missing something. And this matters because conflict isn't just about what is said, it's about what is understood. Two people can hear the exact same words, but interpret them completely differently based on their past experiences, emotional state, and underlying concerns. A leader who lacks perspective will react based on their own interpretation alone. A leader who values perspective will take the time to ensure that meaning is not lost in translation. But gaining perspective requires intentional effort. It means stepping outside of the heat of the moment and asking, what does this look like from the other person's point of view? What might be influencing their reaction? Am I interpreting this through my own biases, or am I seeing it as objectively as possible? It also requires the humility to accept that no single perspective is absolute. Just because we feel strongly about something doesn't make it universally true. Just because we believe we understand the situation doesn't mean we have the full story. When leaders embrace this mindset, they unlock an entirely new way of handling conflict. Instead of taking disagreements personally, they see them as insights into what others value and fear. Instead of resisting different perspectives, they welcome them as tools for better decision-making. Instead of allowing conflicts to create division, they use them to build stronger connections. Perspective is a choice. It's the willingness to pause, to zoom out, and to acknowledge that there is always more to the story than what we initially see. It's the discipline to put ego aside, to listen deeply, and to recognize that true leadership isn't about proving a point. It's about understanding the bigger picture. In moments of tension, uncertainty, or outright conflict, people don't just listen to what a leader says, they absorb how a leader feels. Emotions, like wildfire, spread quickly through a team, an organization, or even an entire culture. And in the midst of chaos, people instinctively look to their leader for cues on how to react. If a leader panics, the team panics. If a leader is defensive, people become combative. If a leader appears overwhelmed, uncertainty takes over. But if a leader remains calm, steady, collected, and composed, that energy ripples outward. It grounds the room, it reassures people, it allows for clarity to emerge even in the most difficult situations. Think about a time when you entered a high-stress environment. Maybe it was a company crisis, a critical meeting, or a moment of heated disagreement. If the person in charge was visibly nervous, speaking in rushed sentences, or reacting emotionally, how did it affect the atmosphere? Chances are it heightened the tension. It made people uneasy. It amplified the sense of instability. Now think of a time when you were in the same kind of environment, but the leader remained calm, unshaken, measured, and intentional with their words. The situation itself may not have changed, but suddenly it felt more manageable. Solutions seemed possible. The team felt anchored rather than adrift. This is not accidental. It is psychological. Human beings are wired to mirror the emotions of those around us, a phenomenon known as emotional contagion. We subconsciously pick up on tone, body language, and facial expressions, and our nervous systems respond accordingly. That's why a baby calms down when held by a relaxed parent, why a room quiets when a speaker lowers their voice, and why a team regains focus when a leader projects confidence in the face of uncertainty. Great leaders understand this. They recognize that their ability to stay composed isn't just about personal control, it's about setting the tone for everyone they lead. Their calm presence acts as an anchor, preventing others from being swept away by the storm of emotion, stress, or fear. But calmness is not the absence of emotion. It's not about suppressing feelings or pretending problems don't exist. It's about mastering emotional discipline, knowing how to regulate feelings rather than letting them dictate decisions. This kind of composure starts with self-awareness. Leaders who exude calm don't do so by accident. They develop habits that help them manage their internal state. They recognize their own triggers. They practice mindfulness, deep breathing, or mental reframing techniques to stay grounded. They train themselves to slow down, to pause before reacting, and to ask themselves, what does this situation need from me right now? Because that's the real question. Not how do I feel about this, but what do the people around me need to see in me? A team facing a difficult challenge doesn't need a leader who panics. They need a leader who projects confidence, even when the path forward isn't immediately clear. An organization dealing with uncertainty doesn't need a leader who overreacts. They need a leader who provides stability, who reassures them that they will navigate through it together. And the more consistently a leader does this, the more it becomes part of the culture. Over time, people internalize it. They start mirroring that steadiness themselves. They learn that high-pressure moments are not cause for alarm, but opportunities to think clearly, to collaborate, and to move forward with intention. This is how strong teams are built, not by eliminating stress or avoiding conflict, but by cultivating a mindset where pressure does not equal panic, where challenges are met with clarity, not chaos, where people trust that no matter what happens, they have a leader who will stand firm, stay composed, and guide them through whatever comes next. Leadership isn't about power. It isn't about control. It isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or having the final word. True leadership, the kind that earns trust, loyalty, and respect, is about service. And nowhere is that more important than in conflict. Most people see conflict as a battleground, a place where one side must win and the other must lose. But great leaders, the ones who practice servant leadership, see conflict differently. To them, conflict isn't about dominance, it's about understanding. It's about creating an environment where people feel heard, valued, and safe enough to bring their real concerns to the table. A servant leader doesn't enter a conflict with the mindset of how can I make my point or how can I assert my authority. Instead, they ask, how can I serve in this moment? How can I help this person feel understood? How can I guide this conversation toward a meaningful resolution? This approach requires a fundamental shift in mindset. Instead of seeing conflict as something to win, a servant leader sees it as something to navigate. Instead of focusing on defending their own position, they prioritize creating a space where everyone involved feels respected and valued. They recognize that their role is not to overpower, but to empower, to help others reach solutions that are not just beneficial in the moment, but sustainable in the long run. But this is easier said than done, because in the heat of the moment, when tensions are high and emotions are raw, the instinct is often to react, to defend, to push back, to prove a point. A servant leader resists that impulse. They understand that their responsibility is not just to manage the conflict, but to manage themselves. Their tone, their body language, and their willingness to listen all set the stage for how the conversation unfolds. Servant leadership in conflict starts with listening. Real listening, not the kind where you're just waiting for your turn to speak, but the kind where you are fully present, fully engaged, and truly committed to understanding the other person's perspective. It's about asking questions that go deeper than the surface-level argument. What's really at the heart of this issue? What is this person truly trying to communicate? What fears, frustrations, or unmet needs might be fueling this conflict? And when they listen, they do so without judgment, because a servant leader understands that most conflict isn't just about what is being said, it's about what's beneath it. It's about emotions, fears, insecurities, and past experiences. It's about people wanting to feel valued, wanting to be heard, wanting to know that their concerns matter. A leader who approaches conflict with a servant's mindset doesn't just hear words, they hear emotions. They don't just see problems, they see people. And in doing so, they create an environment where resolution becomes possible, not through force, but through understanding. This doesn't mean a servant leader avoids difficult conversations or backs down from necessary decisions. Quite the opposite. They address issues head-on, but they do so in a way that prioritizes the well-being of the people involved. They understand that the goal of conflict resolution isn't just to fix a problem, it's to strengthen the relationships within the team, to build a culture of trust where people feel safe enough to disagree, knowing that their leader will handle it with fairness, empathy, and integrity. Servant leadership in conflict also means being willing to take responsibility. A great leader doesn't place blame, they take ownership. They acknowledge where they may have contributed to the situation, whether through action, inaction, or miscommunication. They model humility, showing their team that leadership isn't about being perfect, it's about being accountable. And when tensions rise, a servant leader is the steady hand that keeps the ship on course. They don't add to the chaos, they bring clarity. They don't let ego drive their decisions. They let purpose guide them. They understand that leadership isn't about being right. It's about doing what's right. Through their actions, they teach their team that conflict doesn't have to be destructive. It can be a tool for growth, a catalyst for stronger relationships, and an opportunity to build deeper trust, but only when it is handled with the mindset of service, when the leader sees themselves not as the most important person in the room, but as the one responsible for lifting others up. Leadership isn't tested in moments of peace. It's revealed in moments of conflict. The best leaders don't react, they respond. They don't seek to win, they seek to understand. They recognize that trust is the foundation, perspective is the key, and their calm sets the tone for everyone around them. Conflict isn't something to fear, it's something to navigate. And the leaders who stand out, the ones who earn respect and loyalty, are those who bring clarity to the chaos, turning every challenge into an opportunity to strengthen their team, their culture, and their impact.